My family play a lot of board games, and board games can have lots of pieces that you need to keep organised while you're playing, so I thought I'd make some little hex trays for my brother as a birthday present. Let's take a look at how I put them together, and if you fancy some yourself, check out the link to my shop for more details and custom designs. Welcome to Laurence Builds. I started off by picking up some interesting wood from a nearby supplier. I'm amazed at some of the different colours and patterns you can find in natural wood. For this project, I wanted to have very obviously different trays for different players, so I wanted to make the wood colours as different as possible. The first one I selected was Paddock, this strikingly red wood. For player 2, I chose ash, since it's the palest of all the ones I bought. It's nearly white. Third up was walnut, since it's the darkest of the set. And then finally I chose purple heart, which as the name implies is very, very purple. There are a few other interesting ones in here. Zebrano is the one with the really stripy grain, and both cherry and rosewood are a pleasing pinkish colour. The rest are still nice, but less striking than these ones. The miter saw made cutting off rectangles of the right size absolutely trivial. I set up a stop block to allow me to just push the board into position and run the miter saw through the wood. This part went very easily. I'd done some planning before I started cutting, and had decided that because the boards were 150mm wide, I could either make the corner-to-corner dimension of the hex approaching 150, or I could make them slightly bigger and have the side-to-side dimension approaching 150. I felt that the slightly smaller size would be more suitable, so as not to take up too much space on the gaming table, and so that meant that the hex would be about 125mm side to side. I cut the rectangles slightly oversized to give me some space to make mistakes, and because I knew I'd lose a little size as I cleaned them up. This went very nicely. I quickly made a stack of colourful rectangles, and of course clouds and piles of sawdust. I don't think I emptied the waste bag on the miter saw often enough, and since I haven't got a proper workshop, I haven't set up any proper dust collection. At least, that's my excuse. I wanted to have a template to work with for this project, and fortunately I recently acquired an old 3D printer from work. They were trying to free up some space in one of the workshops in the office and decided to do a giveaway, and miraculously my name came out of the hat. I feel like I never win things in random competitions like this, so I was very happy. It was even worth the 4-hour round trip to the office to collect it. Having a 3D printer meant I could design the shape of the template on computer and then create a real physical version of it to use as a guide. It's fantastic. The initial design was pretty simple. It's just a hexagon with a circle cut out of it, extruded out to give it some depth. But after some testing, I also added some small circles on 2 of the corners, and we'll see those a bit later. The printer was able to run it off after a couple of hours of making Star Wars noises, and I was ready to mark the wood. I think I'm going to be making a lot more templates like this. It's so convenient, much easier than printing a shape on paper and then trying to cut it by hand from MDF or plywood, which always feels like it's going to go horribly wrong or just be a bit inaccurate. And now to turn those rectangles into hexagons. Step 1 was to draw the pencil lines around the template on all of the hexes, so I had something to aim for. Then I could carefully set the miter saw angle to 30 degrees off perpendicular and start slicing the corners off. I knew I'd be tidying them up later with the router, but I tried to get my cuts reasonably accurate anyway. It's much easier to route away a millimetre than a centimetre because there's less wood for the bit to catch in and less effort to cut it away. Now that I'd got the approximate hexes cut, the next stage was to tidy them up with the router. The miter saw isn't the most accurate of tools and has a bit of a habit of leaving divots and scorch marks on the wood, so I stuck my template onto the top of the first hex with double-sided sticky tape and used the router to carefully run a template bit along the edges. This is where the extra blobs on the end came in. They were lined up with the corners that had the grain running across them to protect them and to stop the corners getting ripped off if the router blade got caught in the grain. I had quite a few issues getting this to work properly, but I'll talk about those and how I fixed them in the next video. It did get a little bit involved. This meant that once the hexes were routed to their final size, they still had some lumps around 2 of the corners, so I was going to need to do a bit of sanding to finish them off. I'll get back to that though, as I did it a bit later in the process, mostly because I didn't have the right tool for the job yet. Now that I had some nice wooden hexes to play with, I needed to carve out the bowl shape inside them. I reckoned that the best way to do this would be with a bowl cutting router bit, and I managed to find this massive bit conveniently with a bearing on the top of it, so I could use it to follow a template in the same way that I used the straight template bit earlier. With a bit of care, I was able to slowly plunge it into the middle of the bowl area and start to carve out the waste, stopping every so often to blow the sawdust out. This air compressor has come in really useful as a duster. This process was fairly time consuming as there's a lot of wood to be removed, however the massive router bit did chew through it all quite nicely. While I'm routing these bowls out, I should probably give credit for the idea where it's due. I saw a video on the Fisher's Shop YouTube channel earlier this year where he made some little trays just like these, and I really liked the look of them, so I thought I'd have a go at making some myself. I'd recommend his channel if you like woodworking videos, and there's a link in the description, but make sure you finish this video before you go to check it out. I also added an extra ring inside the template to give me an extra millimetre of clearance all round from the main template. You can see it rattling around inside the main template here. This is because I was chewing the bulk of the waste out quite quickly with a large router bit, but to keep the sides of the bowl clean from scorch marks, I wanted to stop slightly before the line and then come back to do the final little bit with another bit that I was keeping both cooler and sharper by running it much more slowly and only using it for the final finishing pass. In hindsight, I should have plunged slightly deeper with that bit too in order to clean up the bottom of the dish, but that was easy enough to fix with sanding later, so it didn't matter. This two-stage process worked nicely, and after a bit of work I had a nice bowl shape in the middle and of course a huge quantity of sawdust. Routing is a messy process. In the original video I was inspired by, he used a CNC machine to do all the basic cutting, chopping out the hexes and carving out the bowls. This would be a significantly easier way to make the trays, although you'd still have to do quite a bit of sanding to clean them up, so it wouldn't be that much of a time saver. That said, I'm far too much of a purist to use a CNC. It has nothing to do with me not having the space for one, and I promise you I'm not at all jealous. Yes. Of course, finishing one just means I need to do the next 7, so I rattled through those as well and ended up with a stack of carved blanks full of tool marks and scorches from the router. There's no way I'd be able to get my random orbit sander into these holes, it's far too big, so I also picked up a sanding attachment for my drill. This one comes with a foam pad that goes between the drill and the sandpaper, allowing it to bend and flex slightly, which means you don't have to hold it perfectly straight, and it'll naturally follow contours to a certain extent. With this, I was able to quickly smooth out the bottoms of the bowls, but it wouldn't have worked so well for the internal sides, which is why I did the 2-stage carving earlier. In this shot, I've sanded the bottom ones, at least coarsely, and you can really see the difference it's made. I do still need to come back and remove the sanding marks by sanding again with a finer paper, but that again will come later. Now I need to deal with those funny corner protectors. I couldn't leave them part finished like that. By this point, I'd picked up a miniature belt sander, and once I'd worked out how to use it effectively, I was able to bring the corners back in line quite easily, straightening up the edges of the hex. I'm glad I bought this sander. My random orbit sander is great for large, flat areas, but I know from experience that I'd have absolutely ruined these edges if I'd tried to use it on them. Also, this belt sander is adorable. It's ridiculously small, and it looks a bit silly on the workbench, but it's actually quite a good size for the job I wanted it for. Yes, a proper oscillating bench belt sander would have been better, but once again I've had to stick with what I can tuck away in this increasingly packed tool cupboard. I had a bit of a debate with myself at this point over whether to put a round over on the top edge all the way around the edge of the hex. I thought it would probably look and feel nicer, but it would also be extra work. Not so much in cutting the round over itself, as the router is great for that, but in cleaning it up afterwards to be smooth and free of scorch marks. As you can see though, I eventually decided to go with the better option and rounded the top corner. At this point, the trays were all in their final shape and just needed finishing off. I say just, the sanding process itself is quite time consuming. I wanted to start with quite a coarse grit in order to clean up all the tool marks, the scorch marks and any scratches or dings in the surface, and these shapes are complicated enough that each grit level was a 4-step process. First I would use the random orbit sander to clean up the top and bottom faces. Then I could use the drill pad to sand the bottom face of the bowl. And then I go over the outside edge with the belt sander, both running across the flat face, and then a quick swipe over the round over to smooth that out as well. Finally, I'd use a sanding disc held by hand to run round the inside curve and the bottom bowl curve. This last part was the hardest, both because I had to do it manually and because it's a very awkward shape. If I make more of these, I might 3D print something to hold the sandpaper, but because this shape is a compound curve, I don't think the sandpaper will really form that shape very well. After doing all of this with, I think, 100 grit on all of the tools, I moved up to 150 grit, then 220 and 350. At this stage, I wiped them all down with a damp cloth, partly to remove any remaining dust, but also to water pop the grain so I could flatten that as well. This meant another sand at 350, and then I think I finally topped out at 600 grit. That left the surface of the wood feeling silky smooth to the touch. The original boards felt quite nice and just, wood-like when they came from the supplier, but after all this sanding, they're almost like glass. I think it was definitely worth the effort. Now that they're all fully shaped and sanded, there's just the finish to apply. I chose to use cutting board oil for this, and I had plenty left over from a previous project, because it looks good and it's also food safe, meaning that the trays can be used for snacks as well as for gaming pieces. I left it to soak in, then applied a second coat, left it again, and then wiped off the excess. I think they turned out really nicely and I'm very happy with the depth of colour. It's amazing the different colours wood comes in, and this is, as you've seen, without any kind of stain or other colour being applied. I've now handed them over to my brother, and he certainly seemed happy with them. I said at the start of the video that I'd like to make these available for sale, so if you're interested, check out the link in the description to the shop page, or if you're interested in a custom design, size or shape, just email me directly. Again, the address is in the description. Choose your wood, your size and your design, and we'll go from there. Now it's time to start thinking about my next project. I've got a couple of ideas, but I don't know if I'll have good enough weather for the outdoor workshop. Still, there's always the summer. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please check out the playlist of my other projects and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more. Thanks to all my channel supporters as well. You keep me encouraged and keen to do more projects, and of course provide the backing to make them all possible. I'll be back soon with a couple more videos about this project with a more detailed look into my thought process, lessons I learned and what mistakes I made throughout. I'll see you then. Bye bye.